Welcome to Stuff and Whiskey. I'm Josh.
And I'm Erin.
And today we're finding out what our favorite spirit is for old fashions. Is it bourbon or is it rye?
Welcome to the channel bringing real-world content to the real-world whiskey consumer.
Today we're going to find out what we prefer in our old fashions. Our kind of classic go-to in bourbon, or do we prefer rye in them? But before we get into that, and it's very obvious what we're drinking, Erin, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm a little hungry. So after this, I'm going to eat a little snack.
Yeah. It's pretzel time.
It's pretzel time.
Yeah. There was a request for pretzels before the filming started, and I'm like, I'm about to hit the record button.
That was shut down.
So we'll get to that right after this.
How are you?
So I'm doing good. Old fashions are kind of near and dear to our hearts. It was kind of the cocktail that got me into whiskey in a more bougie cocktail way. Like
it kind of got me into it too. It was my gateway into drinking straight up whiskey.
Yeah, I think old fashions are that for a lot of people. So I'm really curious. I've only ever purposely ordered old fashions with bourbon in them. And I may have had some old fashions with rye, but I've never done a back-to-back comparison. Today we're using Bulleit bourbon and Bulleit rye for a couple of reasons. So number one reason is that bourbon and rye are two different types of drinks. Bourbon is more than 51% corn, so it lends itself to being a little bit more sweet. Rye is more than 51% rye grain as its main thing. This particular rye is 95% rye, so it's very high rye.
Didn't know that.
I kind of went back and forth on the specific bourbons and ryes we were going to use for this, and I wanted to get as wide of a gap between the bourbon, which has rye as its secondary grain, and the rye that we use for these cocktails. So I don't know the percentages of Bulleit bourbon off the top of my head. It's at least 51% corn. It does have rye in the mash bill, but I'm not 100% sure how much it is. With this being 95% rye, wide disparity.
Yeah.
Same brand. We thought about using Elijah Craig Small Batch and Elijah Craig rye. We thought about using Old Forester 100 proof bourbon and Old Forester 100 proof rye. There was a lot of options on the table. Ultimately, we chose these because of that wide gap. Also, Bulleit sells very well. This is stuff that a lot of people buy.
Yep.
It's not stuff that you do like Bulleit rye.
I do like Bulleit rye.
Which will be really interesting to see if that leads into her preference on this.
Yeah.
For me personally, I could take or leave both these bottles.
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious to see how this shakes out.
Me too, actually.
So this isn't a how to make a cocktail class. This is which base spirit do we prefer more? And that's just going to be a really personal preference thing. Bulleit bourbon is here on the right-hand side. It's in each of our right-hand glasses. Bulleit rye is on it's our right, your left, Bulleit bourbon. So botch that, but Bulleit bourbon is on your left in our left glass, and Bulleit rye is on your right in our right glass. Let's just get right into it because these have been stirred up. They're going to start getting watered down.
All right.
Let's see what we've got.
This is the original.
This is bourbon. This is a bourbon-based old-fashioned.
Yeah.
And this is a very simple old-fashioned. I'll talk through what I did as we go.
You make a good old-fashioned, sir.
I mean, that's just a really classic old-fashioned.
Yeah.
Your Angostura bitters. This is very simple. I didn't want to get any fancier than I needed to for this. I wanted to make the most basic old-fashioned I could make so that we could you can add in other things.
Okay, what'd you make? How'd you make it?
It's Angostura bitters. It's 2 ounces of whiskey. Instead of using a sugar cube and muddling it down with the bitters, I prefer to use simple syrup. I don't like that graininess that can get in there. So we have a little bit of like a spoonful of simple syrup for each one, and an orange peel for garnish, expressed over the top and wiped around the rim for that little bit of orange flavor. These are super simple. You can add cherries, you can add lemons, you can add different types of bitters, all kinds of stuff. But this is the absolute baseline old-fashioned with a ice block in there. I'm gonna take one more sip of the regular one because I've been talking.
Yeah, the regular one is very good. It's a little bit sweet, like a little bit heavy on the sweet.
It is, and that's one of my issues when a lot of times people put cherries in old fashions that are made with bourbon, it starts to go even more to the sweet side. Like a Luxardo cherry in there with that syrupy sweetness is too much for me.
Yeah.
Let's go over to the rye.
Okay. This is it.
Wow, they are a lot different. I mean, the primary thing in the drink is the whiskey. So having two quite different whiskeys makes sense that they would be different.
This is good. This one tastes less sweet. I actually taste the whiskey in this as opposed to this one. I just kind of get overcome by like a sweet
The
flavor.
Sweetness.
I'm gonna just sip on this one.
So for me, the rye-based old fashioned doesn't taste like an old fashioned for the way that I'm used to drinking them.
What does it taste like?
It tastes old fashioned-esque, but it's lacking that sweet twist that I'm used to.
It's still very sweet to me though.
It is very sweet because of the simple syrup.
Yeah.
And the orange, like, it definitely does have some sweetness in there. I think my middle ground probably would be a lower rye percentage rye, like a 51% rye,
Really?
like an Elijah Craig or a Pikesville rye would be great. Rittenhouse, something like that that's a little bit more in my personal wheelhouse for rye preferences, since the base spirit is such a big part of this cocktail. But you really loving Bullet Rye, I'm not surprised that you like the Bullet Rye Old Fashioned over the Bullet Bourbon Old Fashioned.
It's just less sweet. It's still very sweet. And it's funny because this used to be like my go-to drink for a while. And now that I don't drink sweet cocktails hardly ever anymore. If I do drink a cocktail, it's a Boulevardier or a Negroni, which are very bitter.
Yeah, that Campari in there makes them bitter.
It's really interesting because both of these taste like I'm straight up drinking sugar.
Yeah.
Which I would never have said that 2 years ago, even 2 years ago, maybe.
Same.
Maybe 3 years ago.
Same. And we've been out to bars and I've ordered old fashions in recent years. It's not the same anymore.
No.
It's gotten to the point now to where if I'm drinking whiskey, I would prefer just to drink it neat personally, or with just a few drops of water. If I'm drinking a cocktail, I almost always order something off the beaten path, away from whiskey. I'll order something that's gin based usually, or rum based, or something like that. Yeah. I don't tend to do a lot of whiskey cocktails anymore.
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like this is very similar to my journey with coffee. I did not drink coffee at all, got into coffee in college, and started out with white chocolate mochas, which are
who doesn't? Yeah.
The sugariest, barely coffee drink you could ever have. But for me at the time, it was way coffee flavored. And then I kind of graduated to like a vanilla latte, I think, or maybe a peppermint latte, and then a vanilla latte, and then, there's one other thing in between there, and then now I just drink coffee black. I think whiskey, or probably alcohol in general, has that same progression, or can have that same progression, whereas this used to be my go-to. Yep. And now it's almost, both of these are almost too sweet for me.
Honestly, this definitely does temper down the sweetness some, but it just doesn't taste like I'm used to old fashions tasting, which is why I do prefer the bourbon side of the equation. But I'm with you. I would much rather have something like a Negroni or a Boulevardier, something that has more of a bit of a bitter twist, or like just not as high of a sweetness as the baseline for the base flavor.
Right.
So very interesting. You prefer the rye. I prefer the bourbon. We both have moved on from old fashions.
Yeah, I would say so.
We will.
Honestly, I wouldn't have known that. I did not know that prior to right now.
Yeah.
I would have said I would love an old fashioned, but they're both really sweet.
But we have had some really good old fashions as of late. We took a trip up to Bardstown Bourbon Company, and they had a barrel aged old fashioned, which definitely was really good.
Yeah.
It still was sweet, but I think the sweetness was probably tempered a little bit by that time in the barrel. And it really did add a lot to what is overall a drink that we have kind of moved past in our experience.
Yeah.
For better, for worse, for indifferent, I still have a lot of love for old fashions.
Oh, same.
And if I'm ever at a bar that I feel like isn't well versed in cocktails and I want to order a cocktail, then I'll still order an old fashioned. It's kind of my de facto go-to.
Well, and I feel like most bars know how to make at least a semi-decent old fashioned.
Right.
Like it's a very classic cocktail.
You can get some mediocre old fashions and you can get some pretty okay old fashions, but it's hardly ever feels like a complete waste of money.
Yeah.
If you're you know, if you ever catch yourself out at Chili's with the family or something, I don't know.
Oh, I want some skillet queso.
I mean, I want some skillet queso too, but I'm actually kind of walking back my idea of having an old-fashioned at Chili's.
Okay, that's fair, but I still want skillet queso.
But if you ever get stuck at a restaurant that maybe doesn't do great cocktails, or you don't have high expectations, or maybe they don't have some of the more esoteric ingredients that
was
some
a big
of the
word, my friend. He's smarty pants.
If they don't have some of the things like a Campari or whatnot to make other types of drinks that you might find in other types of bars that are a little bit more cocktail specific, then it's hard to go wrong with an old fashioned.
True.
I think we found that I should order one with bourbon as I'm used to, and you probably would be better off ordering one and requesting rye instead.
Probably, yeah.
Which is interesting. Like, we never would have known this had we not done this little back-to-back experiment.
It's funny because we've had bourbon and rye for a long time, and we've never done this before. We just kind of stick with what we know too. So this is a really good push out of the box for us to try both of these.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's something that we probably never would have done, but because of this channel, we're thinking of ideas for episodes, and we're like, oh, this would be cool if we did a little back-to-back rye versus bourbon old fashioned. What are you doing? This
opened up a lot with the ice cube. It's still very sweet. Yeah. But the flavors changed.
And that's the thing with an old fashioned, as the ice melts, it does temper some of that sweetness in the bourbon or in the rye. And it mellows the sweetness of the spirit out a little bit, and things kind of blend together. So your cocktails will morph over time. Do you still think you have a preference to the rye?
Let me try.
Do we need to walk back everything we just talked about?
No, I still have a preference to the rye. But this one is less sweet. It's opened up. They're both really good. I probably couldn't drink both because I would get a sugar headache more than anything.
And there's not that much sugar in them.
Yeah, but I would feel like I would get a sugar headache, or just kind of get sick feeling from the sweetness. But drinking one or the other, they're both, I would take both of them. Either one, not both. Yeah. Either one.
And so these mirror our whiskey preferences. I do tend to have a preference towards bourbon. Aaron, you do tend to have a preference towards rye. Yeah. So these do mirror that. If you're someone who typically prefers rye and you do order old fashions when you go out and you get them with bourbon, maybe request rye.
Yeah, give it a try.
Or order two, one with bourbon and one with rye, and do this experiment yourself.
That might be expensive though.
Or if you have a bourbon and rye at home and you want to try this yourself, by all means, knock yourself out. Yeah. This was super fun.
It was really fun. I can't believe we've never done this before.
I know. When we were coming up with ideas for the weekly podcast episodes, this one was one I was really excited about. So we've got a huge bank of ideas, and we wanted to put this one pretty soon. This is our first cocktail episode.
Yeah.
So even though we're not teaching you guys how to make cocktails, we'll have a recipe to an old fashioned or two in the description below that you can check out if you want to make one at home yourself. Pretty easy if you've got a little bit of whiskey on hand and access to sugar or bitters or, an orange. It doesn't take a whole lot to make a good old fashioned, just so long as you stick to the recipe. Yeah. And then once you perfect that, you can start doing some twists and turns on it.
Cool.
So, yeah.
We need to do a margarita episode. I know this is whiskey channel, but it's stuff.
Well, it's stuff and whiskey. Yeah. And technically margaritas do fall in the stuff category. Yeah.
And I say that because prior to maybe a year ago, he was very anti-margarita.
It's not my thing.
And I got him to like one at a restaurant here in town.
Yeah.
And then now he's not anti-margarita, so that would be fun to do.
So maybe we'll have a margarita episode coming up, kind of a traditional margarita that you get at most places versus what I like, which is a little bit more of a clean and simple margarita.
I like that one too a lot.
Yeah. So if you guys have any other ideas for us to do head-to-head cocktail type recipe things like this, let us know in the description below. We've got a few in our ideas docket that is 2 years of content piling up. So we've got
He's
a lot
the idea guy.
We've got a lot of episodes in the pipeline, but if there's something that you guys really want to see, let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, please do. All right, so let's get into some other stuff.
All right.
I don't have anything.
So other stuff for me this week is here in the frame. So it is this beautiful cutting board.
Let's show it.
Yeah. This thing is something special. This is made by Holbrook Wood Company, which is run by Nate Glover. This was actually a gift from a friend of ours. I know Nate's brother, Tyler.
Yep.
And this was a housewarming gift for this home that we film in.
Yes.
And it's not just a studio. We actually do live here. But this was a gift by Tyler as a housewarming present. And it is an incredible cutting board. It is a literal work of art. You can find him at holbrookwoodco on Instagram. We'll put the website in the description below, as I said. Provided that you like cutting boards and you like craftsmanship, then these are awesome cutting boards. Like I said, this was a super amazing gift from a good friend of ours for a housewarming present. I'm so in love with this thing. It's so nice that we have yet to actually cut on it.
I know. We just cut things and then place the things on the board because I don't want to like mess it up.
It's so nice. It's probably one of the most nice things that we own.
one of the few.
I mean, it does feel like a work of art when you're handling it. I actually use it a lot for like if we're doing whiskey flights. Like I will put the glasses on there and present them on the board. And they get a little slippy slidey on here. It's not built for that.
Yeah.
It's built for cutting. We are going to use it for that.
Maybe.
But we just have to I need to just make the first cut on it and let it start getting some wear and tear.
First cut is the deepest.
It is. It's
I feel like we've referenced that song before.
We have.
But it just fits so many things.
Yeah. On this thing in particular. So I really love craftsmanship.
Yeah.
I really have a high appreciation for that. And I personally love woodworking. Knowing the quality of this, it's worth every penny.
Yep.
That's it for this week's video podcast. We'll be back next week with another one.
Thank you so much for watching today's video. Thank you. If you like old fashions, leave a comment below. Tell us if you've had one with bourbon or with rye, and if you have a preference, let me know. And then also, if you like this video, give us a like. That thumbs up button that really pushes our video content out to other YouTubers.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Up.
That. And also, you could hit subscribe if you're not subscribed to our channel. We do videos twice a week, on Thursdays and Saturdays. So if you subscribe and you hit that bell notification, you won't miss one.
If you want to support the channel, you can do so via the Patreon link in the description below. Until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.